Hi, welcome to some Christmas ideas with GourmetQuilter. We're having a whole lot of fun. We've got 20 different ideas for Christmassy type things happening over 20 days. We are up to day 7, so life is looking good. We've got some various ornaments, we've had some table mats and all sorts of things, and today we're doing a table runner. If you're interested in more information, there's information and a pattern that you can purchase and download on the website. So the videos come every day, the pattern comes every day for 20 days. So not all at once. So you would get something like this. This time we're doing a table runner and there's some applique, so there's shapes to trace and everything's in the pattern. On GourmetQuilter.com under 2020 Tasty Treats, because they are just tasty treats. So this is the table runner we're making. So it's quite long, hopefully you can see that. It's kind of fun. It's just got a nice little wintry house, so this is my kind of nighttime look with a darker background. And these stars that just trail through as if they were kind of the smoke coming out of the chimney of the little cottage, and I thought that was quite cute. So I'm going to show you how I've gone about making that. I'll just pin this one up so that it's behind me so you can see it maybe, if I'm not in the way. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've already cut out and I've joined up most of the table runner because it's very straightforward. It was the centerpiece, it was border strips on the sides, end border strips, and then I've put a backing on and I've quilted it because I've just done straight line quilting all the way, the whole length, and approximately ½ an inch, maybe somewhere between ½ an inch and ¾ of an inch apart. I didn't measure them, so they're not absolutely exact. They could be closer, they could be further apart. You could do some different sort of quilting. When I'm doing this sort of work, I quite like to quilt first and then do the applique. If you've seen some of the other ones on the placemat, we did that sort of thing. I just find that it just works in really nicely, and I don't have to, when I do the quilting, I don't have to avoid all my shapes. If you use a thread on the back for the back stitching that matches your backing, it won't show, it just disappears into the backing. So I've started positioning my pieces, so I'm doing exactly the same colours except I've swapped out my roof because I didn't want this green on the roof on this one, and I've just started placing everything here. I haven't ironed anything on yet, so I thought I could show you how I go about doing that. So I should just mention too, the batting I've used is just a lightweight, it's a cotton poly 80-20 blend. It is actually just lightly fusible, you don't need a fusible batting, but I do suggest something not too thick and bouncy when you're using things on the table, because if you're going to put anything on them, you want them to sit fairly flat, and the cotton and cotton blend battings work really well for that. So when I'm positioning something on like this, so when these little stars trail up, the largest star is in the center. So I've just popped a pin at my halfway mark so that I know where center is, and so that I can position this. I'll just bring this over a touch. So I would just position my star central to the length of the table runner and visually, so that it looks more or less right side to side. And I haven't tried to make the stars in any particular direction, they're just swirling themselves around. So that's my one in the middle, which just gives me something to work to when I'm doing this. So to me, when I was designing this, I was thinking of smoke trailing out of the chimneys and meeting in the middle. So that's what's happening, even though it's stars. So I've got my house shape here. So I've just got a fusible web on the back. I'm using a steam seam, so it's a little bit sticky, so it'll just sit in place. So just making sure that it's sitting right about side to side and up probably ½ to ¾ of an inch, something like that. And then I can pop my roof on. And again, just sort of making an eye, keeping an eye on things sitting reasonably straight. And we've got a door. But I thought it was quite fun to make the two in more or less the same colours. So all the applique except for the roof is the same on both table runners, but I've changed my background and borders so that you can see that you don't have to make a lot of changes to something to make them look pretty good. And then I've got these stars to position, so they're probably the hardest part of doing all this because we just want to make sure it just looks like it's coming up initially out of that chimney. Go in size order from smaller to larger and move it on there, something like that. And sometimes I find when I do this sort of thing I have to have a good look at it before I iron anything in place, because it would be quite nice if they sat reasonably evenly, reasonably symmetrically, although I don't think anyone's going to be measuring my stars on my Tablerunner. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's all looking pretty good. So I'm just going to iron all those in place now, and then we'll just get started on this applique. So this is a fairly quick form of applique. I'm going to be doing free motion stitching with the applique. You wouldn't have to do free motion. You could put your foot on and just do some straight stitch with a fused raw edge, or you could do a blanket stitch. There's lots of different things you can do. I'm going to do the free motion because I enjoy doing that, and to me that's a really good answer for this sort of thing. So I know people get a little concerned with the free motion and fused raw edge about washing, especially when it's tableware and things, but I don't have any trouble. The edges may go ever so slightly furry, but it won't go anywhere because everything's cut on funny angles. It doesn't particularly fray. Straight edges are what really frays. The fusible web helps hugely with things just staying where you put them because it's a glue and it just stops that fabric from pulling apart as well as everything else. So I'm going to start doing some applique. I think I'll just start on one of the houses. So I've got my dropped my feed teeth. I've got a little open toe free motion foot on, and other than that I think I'm all set to go. So when I do something like this, I'm going to come all the way around the house first, from starting near the roof, because I like to keep going as much as possible without stopping and starting. When I start, I do a couple of stitches on top of each other and then just come around. Sit. I'm just close to the edge of that applique. And then when I get to something like this door that's in the same sort of region of stitching, I'm going to just go around the door at the same time. And then just come across the bottom of the door again. And then up the side wall. And then we can go straight onto the roof here and come all the way around that as well. And the chimney. So you can see the free motion is quite good for something like this. It's not as large as a quilt, but it is quite long, and to be handling and turning would make life a little bit more involved. However, not impossible. If you don't want a free motion, that's fine. So I'm back here where I started now, but I haven't gone across that roof yet, so all the edges do need stitching. So I'm just going to keep going right the way across there. And a couple of stitches on top to lock it off. So I've still got the windows to do, but I thought I'd just do a star while I'm here, just so that you've seen me do a little bit of everything, and then I'll get all the applique done. So I'll just get a star done as well. It just goes a bit slower when you're doing something this particular, and I'm using a dark grey thread, which does mean that if you're seeing the stitching, you could use a matching thread. It doesn't stand out as much if you wobble, and we do wobble. And again, put the stitches on top. So that's how I'm doing all the stars. The house, I've got to do the windows. So I'll go ahead and keep doing the applique and come back and show you how we finish off. So I went ahead, I finished all the applique. You can't see where I've gone on the back, well, barely. I've got a grey thread, so you can actually see the grey thread, but other than that, it's looking pretty good. So now I'm just ready. I'm started trimming it down because we're going to pop the binding on next. So trimming, I'm sure you all know how to trim. However, I often use the lines on my board to help me line things up, just to keep an eye that things are sitting straight. The chances are this will sit straight anyway. It's only small, especially if you only do straight line quilting. When you start doing other types of quilting, things can move a whole lot more, so sometimes you've got to be a little bit careful about that. Quilting is really good if you can keep an even amount of quilting all over your work, so that you don't get areas of tight and loose. And so when it's longer than my ruler, all I can do is just do bits of it at a time, bring it closer and then do the next bit. But just keep an eye that this is staying straight here, and because we're working with a border, you can pretty much keep it all lined up with your ruler where all the seam sits and everything, and it should just stay straight anyway. But it's a good idea just to keep an eye on things. When it's a bigger quilt, it's a little bit different. You have to watch for a few other things. So that's all ready. Now I'm going to machine my binding on onto the back and then bring it to the front and machine it down. I find that that works best for me. So I'm just going to get started now. So I've joined my binding strips. We're having a jazzy stripy binding. I've joined my strips with a diagonal seam. They won't match exactly. This is not an even stripe, so I haven't particularly tried to match them there, and I've opened the seams out. I find that sits really nicely with a diagonal, because then you don't get a big lump where it rolls over. It spreads it out. So when I start my binding, I've pressed over the first corner so that I've got a nice diagonal line there, and everything's sitting with raw edges there. So I'm just going to start somewhere. It doesn't really matter where you start, just not perhaps right at a corner. And when I do my binding, I like to just start the sewing at the beginning of that folded point there, and just stitch along just until the end of that folded segment, and then I take it out. I tend not to press my binding before I sew it on, partly it's because I tend to feel that when we roll our binding over, that fold is not necessarily in exactly the right place for where I want it to be. So in my mind, there's a lot of things go on in my mind. So I'm going to leave a gap. So I stop sewing here. I'm going to leave a gap so that when the other end comes, I can tuck that in. So just like between 2 or 3 inches, not too much. And then I'll start sewing with it now folded over, so all the raw edges are together. And I'm just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I can just go all the way along. I can show you a corner, but it's a long way away. I might show you a corner a bit later. When you're doing a long length like this, you want to keep the edges, you don't want them to start getting too wavy. So we want to just add, it's not really a whole lot of pull on it, but just a little hint of tension on the binding. So rather than let it sit there and possibly get a little bit floppy, I like to just pull it. I don't know if you can really see what I'm doing, but I'm just giving it just a tiny tug. So it's just slightly firm, but not tight. And that just helps hold those edges nicely. So I do that all the way, just keeping the binding sitting nice and firm. So it doesn't take too long to put a binding on like this. It's kind of fun. It makes things very robust. So I might go ahead and I'll show you when I get to one of the corners how I do the corner flippy thing. So I'm just coming up to a corner. It's actually the last corner, but the corners are all done the same way, so it doesn't really matter which one it's at. And I'll just show you how I do that. So I'm coming up here and I'm going to stop sewing a 1/4 inch before the edge of my table runner. Now, if you've got a machine like this one, there's little markings on the foot that show you when you're a 1/4 inch away from where the needle is. So that's very convenient. If you don't have anything like that, you could put a pin in or mark with a little pencil or something. And then I'm just going to leave the needle down and just stitch out through that diagonal point there. Then I have to take it out of the machine, and then I'm going to fold so that it folds right through the diagonal corner of the table runner, and then I'm going to fold it back down again so that this fold now lines up with that raw edge there, so that you've got this little foldy thing going in there. I'm sure you know how to do this actually, I've shown you before. And then I'm just going to come and start sewing here again. But I'm also nearly back at the beginning, so I can show you how I tuck the ends in. So this is back where we started now. This is my little open segment here. So I'm just going to make sure that this tucks well in beyond where that little folded corner comes down. So I can cut that away now. I don't need that excess length of binding. I'm ready for another project. And so sometimes when it's quite long like this, as long as it sits fine here, it may just jut out a little bit at this sort of end here, and that's not a problem. I just trim that off. It's more important that the folded bit looks right than that little bit inside there. And then just finish off. Because I often just trim this bit anyway because of the extra bulk of that extra layer in there. So that's fine to just trim off some of that excess there, so that when we roll that over, it's just lessened some of the excess. It's still a little bit bulky. So now I've done all that, and now I'm ready to bring it over and sew it down onto the right side. So I'm going to do that, and I'll start near one of the corners so I can just show you. But the corner is very straightforward. We just bring it over, stitch down until you're nearly at the corner, and this fold just goes straight to the end there. And then we bring that up, and that should just sit as a nice mitre. But I'll do it in the machine so you can see how I get to it. So I'm just going to bring that over. So you will see, but if you're doing this method, you may well see a line of stitching on the back just inside the binding there, but it really doesn't show unless you go looking for it, of course. The trouble is always there if you go looking for it, I find. I'm just sewing quite close to the fold. Coming up to this corner now, so I'm just going to bring that fold all the way straight down towards me, and then I can just fold that piece up. So if you're wanting to pop a pin in to hold that, you could do that so that those corners meet nicely just there, or you can just hold it. So I like to sew, and I like to get my needle onto that piece that's going to be going the other way, and so then I leave the needle down and I can pivot so that everything is sitting nicely in place. And then I just like to do a little back stitch just there, and then just keep going. So all the corners are done exactly the same way. So I will keep going, and I will show you at the other end. So just coming along the last part of the binding, nearly back to where I started. Stitch to finish off, trim my thread, and we have a fun table runner which looks absolutely very much like this other one, but in quite different colours. So I think that's kind of fun to do things in different colours. I think probably if you've got a nice big banquet table where you're going to have 20 people sitting down, you need table runners up the centre. You're going to need to be wearing, especially if it's a banquet, you're going to be needing to wear your crown. You're going to need to have your placemats, your coasters, your table runner. What more could you want in life than having a fun Christmas table like that? So these are some of the other projects, if you haven't seen them, that we're doing as the Christmas ideas. So that was the table runner idea for idea number 7, and I will see you again with idea number 8.